Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Elizabeth Demings with the Institute for Food Safety at Cornell University, and this is a long-awaited session of Produce Industry Virtual Office Hours, so welcome. Today's session is going to be all about agricultural water. We have Dr. Betsy Bin, the Director of the Produce Safety Alliance, the Director of the National Gas Program, and the Executive Director of the Institute for Food Safety at Cornell University presenting today. Following her presentation, we're going to have our moderated Q&A with our support from the Produce Safety Alliance, or the PSA team, including Dr. Dawn Spuckle, who will be serving as our moderator. The Produce Safety Alliance is a collaboration between Cornell University, the FDA, and the USDA to prepare fresh produce growers to meet the regulatory requirements included in the FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act Produce Safety Rule. They provide fundamental science-based on-farm food safety knowledge to fresh fruit and vegetable farmers, packers, workers, regulatory personnel, and others that are interested in the safety of fresh produce. In addition to the PSA team, we have representatives from the New York State Department of Ag and Markets on the call, and they'll be here to help address any regulatory questions that come up. We received several questions submitted in advance of today's session, and we will address them either during the presentation or during the Q&A. If you do have any other questions that come up throughout today's discussion or the presentation, go ahead and type them directly into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself during the QA and ask them live. If you are joining us by phone, remember to mute and unmute yourself is to press *6. And then with that, I'll go ahead and hand the screen off to Betsy, and she can start her presentation.
Great. Thanks, Beth. It's great to be here today, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen, and once I get a thumbs up from that, we'll move along with the presentation.
Yep, it's great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Beth, for organizing this and also for sending the questions in advance. We are super happy that you are joining us today to talk about agricultural water as it pertains to fruit and vegetable safety, and really with a focus on the produce safety rule, the FSMA produce safety rule. So welcome, and hang on one second, folks. I'm going to try to make this binging stop. I just got a new computer today, so everyone will be patient with me if things don't work like they're supposed to. When putting together this presentation, it really was a task, because when you think about water as it relates to fruit and vegetable production and microbial safety, it's very complex. We have about 30 minutes. So what I tried to do was get everyone on the same page. And this is really a reaction to some of the questions that were submitted through the pre-registration page. So I really do want to thank Beth for sharing those, because it was very helpful in putting this together. I'd like to make it clear what's required now of fruit and vegetable growers who are subject to the produce safety rule, and really clear there that it's the growers that are subject to the produce safety rule, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We did focus on the questions, and so we'll try to address those questions as we go. Don and I have been in contact, and we'll try to put information in the chat box, as well as with Donna and Beth and the others, and we'll leave time for questions. So that's kind of what we're going to do in this 30 minutes, and we welcome you to put questions in the chat box as we go as well, so that we can address them. So starting out, here's an abridged timeline for subpart E. And again, I'm trying to focus here on just getting everybody on the same page in terms of the context of where we're at. So although the Food Safety Modernization Act was signed into law in 2011, the final produce safety rule was not published until November 27th of 2015. The original subpart E compliance dates were expected to begin way back in 2018, but they were delayed. And what we saw was that delay kept pushing forward. And on December 6th of 2021, new proposed subpart E was published with a comment period. For those of you that work with the Produce Safety Alliance at all, you will know we had grower focus groups at that point to gather comments and to get those submitted to FDA. And so that's sort of ongoing, right? We submitted those comments. FDA is looking at those comments. And what was decided between that December 21st and the January 26th of this year was that enforcement for subpart E for harvest and post-harvest water began for the largest farms. So when we saw that new proposed subpart E come out in December of 2021, the parts for harvest and post-harvest were not altered. And so they went ahead and started enforcement of harvest and post-harvest water beginning in January of this year. You will note I added the word soft launch here. It's because different places are maybe educating before they're strictly enforcing, and we're seeing some variation on how states are doing that enforcement. And that's why I added those words soft launch. They're made up, but essentially they're meant to indicate that things are a little variable at the moment. And then you'll see here that we have some indication that we will see the final subpart E for pre-harvest and production water, hopefully in October of this year. We don't actually know that for sure. Sorry, my email is closed. I don't know why that is doing that. But that's where we're at. So hopefully we will move forward with that in our minds. So here's some helpful definitions that I think are very important for people to recognize. Agricultural water means water used in covered activities on covered produce where water is intended to or likely to contact covered produce or food contact surfaces. Covered produce means produce that is subject to the requirements of the produce safety rule. And the term covered produce refers to the harvestable and harvestable part of the crop. So that's really key definitions to get everybody on the same page about what we're talking about. When we talk about agricultural water, we're talking about covered produce, food contact surfaces, and that water that is intended to contact them. There's also this caveat that all agricultural water must be safe and of adequate sanitary quality for its intended use. This is sort of a qualitative standard that has to be assessed by the growers in terms of, is that water of adequate sanitary quality? There is not a quantitative level here that you're looking at. So we're going to talk about this throughout this presentation. There was a question in the pre-submission talking about when we're going to talk about different kinds of water. So I wanted to put this right up front. This is modified from some slides we have in the grower training course. There's really two types of ag water: that used during production or pre-harvest. So that's water in contact with the produce during the growing. The top picture, you can see some overhead irrigation there. That includes irrigation, fertigation, foliar sprays, frost protection, anything that goes on prior to harvest. Then we have harvest and post-harvest water. And again, that's water used at, during, or after harvest. So think about if there's any water that contacts while you're harvesting, anything such as flumes, dump tanks, hydrocoolers, that's going to be your harvest and your post-harvest water. And you can see here, this box indicates that this harvest and post-harvest water is what is currently subject to enforcement, right? That's the part that is a go right now. So we use these slides all the time during grower training. They're from our supplemental materials, but I wanted to put them in here to really drive home this point of what is agricultural water. So here we have lettuce being overhead irrigated. So for those of you that are participating with us, why don't you put in the chat box whether or not you think this is agricultural water? Yes. Okay, I should have made that question a little harder. Why is it ag water? Okay, so it's ag water that's touching a covered product. Lettuce is covered. And so that's great. You know this one, and that's a great answer. Okay, so let's try this one. Is this agricultural water? And if you say yes or no, tell us why. Maybe no, maybe not. Thank you, Sarah. There we go. No, it's not, because potatoes are not covered produce. Right. Okay. So good. We've got some very informed people on the call. Thank you for putting that in the chat box. What about this one? And we did have somebody submit questions about hydroponics. So I put this one in specifically for that. Anyone? Thanks, Don, for clarifying the harvestable versus edible.
Yeah, there was one response about edible, so
Yep.
you know that
Yep.
word.
Yep. Thank you for doing that. I love it when we can all work together. How about this one, folks? This is a tough one. Yep.
Yeah. Let me throw you under the bus and ask whether you think that those roots are harvestable. Is the harvest happening when you cut the leaves, or is the harvest happening when you lift the float?
Right. Well, it's also interesting when we think about how these products are marketed, right? Because some hydroponic lettuces are marketed with the roots still on, right? And I love this particular picture, any of those that, because the hands are actually in the water touching the roots. And I think, again, depending on the operation, this could be ag water, or maybe you would say it's not ag water. In most hydroponic operations that I have been in, that water gets on the product. Whether it's intended to, it is likely to. Okay. You can also see here that the person's hands are in that water. So if they're then carrying it over, not washing their hands and touching the product, that water is going to definitely be ag water, because it's going to be transferred direct to the product. So this is a really interesting one to me. And I've talked to quite a few different hydroponic operations, and it's very interesting to think what this water is and how you would capture that. In risk analysis, it is a risk of contaminant. It's again, in most of the operations I've seen, definitely likely to contact. So thank you for those comments. How about this one? Is this ag water? Oh my Lord, that's going to drive me insane. Okay. Why is it not ag water? The definition of ag water is water that is going to contact produce or food contact surfaces, right? So I would say this is ag water, because as Don just pointed out, that conveyor belt is probably going to be a food contact surface. Okay. But, maybe if we're talking about the outside of the machine, maybe not. How about this one? And I should tell you, as Donna reminded me in the edits to these slides, those are tomato harvest buckets. Does that help? She's like, don't assume people know what they're looking at, right? So yeah, definitely ag water. Those harvest containers are going to have water touching them. Okay, so I think we're all on the same page. I appreciate you guys in the chat box and talking about that. Just want to highlight all those different places where we see ag water. So here's a list of the harvest and post-harvest requirements that appear in subpart E. And this is mostly just to get you aligned with what we're actually going to be talking a little bit more about. In the team, you're going to see the next couple of slides. We had a big discussion about where we should be putting the provision numbers. And mostly this is meant to just cue you into some of the things that we see as priorities. Of course, you can look up these specific provision numbers and exactly what the wording says if you're interested in and want all of those exact details, okay? So what we're going to do now is you can see these are numbered 1 through 7, and we're going to step through each of these and highlight a few things on each of them. We're not going to go too far in depth because of time, but we wanted to cue you into a few things and help you walk through where things are at right now with these post-harvest water requirements. So starting with the compliance dates, for the largest businesses, which are categorized as all other businesses, so those are the big farms over that $500,000 mark, enforcement for harvest and post-harvest ag water requirements started January 26th of 2023. Those smaller businesses are going to come in next year. Those are they say small, but we would say in the middle, right? The middle businesses, that 250 to 500K. And then the very small businesses will come in January 26th in 2025, right? So you're going to step in over the next 3 years, starting this January. When we look at one of the requirements for an annual agricultural water systems inspection, what we realized when we started talking to people about these requirements is that folks were not aware of this annual agricultural water system inspection being a requirement. So a lot of work has gone into that. When the rule is final, it also includes production water. Production water will be part of that agricultural water systems inspection. But for now, it's focused on that post-harvest water. So what does your entire agricultural water system inspection look like? What does the whole system look like? This is different than a lot of discussion that's happened about the agricultural water assessment, which is part of the proposed changes for the pre-harvest and production water, okay? And the difference is the ag was required for untreated groundwater, untreated surface water sources, and only when those are used as production water. So what we tried to do is create a fact sheet to help people understand the difference between these things. We are also working on educational materials, a decision tree to help you do an agricultural water systems inspection, right? Updating those required records so that you can get that done for now, or if you're a smaller business coming up, right? So that's where we're at with this information. And again, there's a lot of more information coming. This fact sheet just went live in May. Somebody will put the link, thank you, put the link, Donna, in the chat box. And this is required now for those farms that are subject to the rule and part of that post-harvest water requirement. Okay. 3 would be initial quality of post-harvest agricultural water. Testing is required for post-harvest water. Okay, so you're again going back to that 2015 PSR requirements for post-harvest water. The standard is no detectable generic E. coli in 100 ml water sample. It also needs to be considered safe and of adequate quality for its intended use. So you'll see here we put in orange that a test result showing no detectable generic E. coli does not automatically mean the water is safe and of adequate quality. There are situations where you could have no detectable generic E. coli, but maybe you're putting it into something that's not sanitary or clean, like a dump tank, lacking sanitation, or some other issues that would make that water not safe and of adequate quality for its intended use. Lots of things could be associated here. So wanted to make sure you understood that there's those 2 requirements, right? Starting with no detectable generic E. coli, but also making sure that it's of safe and adequate quality for its intended use. If you are getting water from a municipality, you can get those test results from the municipality. We are working on some additional information about that because that is not always as easy as it should be, I'm going to say, or seems to be. So we're also working on additional information for that. There are lots of resources available. Hopefully somebody put in, yes, thank you, the testing methods for ag water. So that information is in the chat box for those of you that have questions about that.
Betsy,
Yep.
there have been two interesting comments in the chat box, and I
Great.
think that one we could address later, which is whether cleaning solution is considered agricultural water. But the one that's a little simpler is Jose asked about ice and whether ice is considered water.
Yes, ice is definitely considered water. And I thank you for that question. So interesting story. We were out on a farm and we were asking them if they were using any water at harvest. And the farm said, no, not using any water at harvest. And we walked out in the field while they were harvesting and they were top icing. Right. So this is sometimes a confusing topic, understanding that ice is water. So if that ice is being top iced, it would definitely fall into the post-harvest water requirements and needs to be made of water that has no detectable generic E. coli. Also, other things we see when it comes to handling ice are the shovels, making sure the shovels aren't being left on the ground, making sure those are handled in a clean and sanitary way so that you're not cross-contaminating that ice. Thanks, Don. Anything else?
No, I think that catches us up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Number 4, maintaining quality of water and talking about water change schedules. So post-harvest water that comes into contact with produce or food contact surfaces repeatedly. So think about your batch water, recirculated water has to be managed to maintain its sanitary quality. You have to have a water change schedule for recirculated water. It's our understanding that that would also include batch water, but I know there's some debate about the difference of what those words mean. What you have to do is develop a system based on your practices, and that is going to be different for every farm because how you're using that water, what's going into that, what commodities are going into that water, what soil is coming in on those commodities. Very different operations depending on what you're doing. We wanted to highlight preamble comments 251 and 252 for those of you that are interested in this topic. Also wanted to highlight that currently in the grower training course in module 5.2 slide 62 talks about the requirement for a water change schedule. We also had a May 9th educators call that had practical recommendations to meet post-harvest ag water requirements. So we wanted to clue you into that. And I can see all of those are going into the chat box. The important thing here is that you have to establish a water change schedule. It can be based on many different things. And again, you have to determine what is best for your operation. So in giving you a few examples, if you have commodities that are coming in, you don't have a lot of broken fruit, you don't have a lot of organic matter, maybe it's a very small batch system, maybe you're going to dump after so many loads, and that's how you're going to determine your change schedule. Maybe you have other ways that you validated based on other methods that you're using in your operation. But the key thing here is you got to know what's happening in the water, right? How are you using that water and what's happening in that water to help you determine the best way to establish a change schedule. Maintaining quality of water and talking about organic buildup. Again, that organic buildup could be debris, could be leaves, soil, could actually be broken fruit, other stuff that washes off. It may be an indication of quality issues. Maybe it's not. It really depends on what is causing the organic matter in there. It can definitely interfere with chemical treatments. We know if you're using chlorine as a sanitizer, you're likely to have impacts if you have a lot of organic load. Important point, sanitizers are not required by the Food Safety Modernization Act's Produce Safety Rule, but also important to note that maintaining water quality is very difficult without a sanitizer. I know there's very different feelings from different growers about whether or not they want to use a sanitizer, but both of those are very important points. Visual observation for organic matter helps a farm make decisions So if you're talking about looking at turbidity, as you can see in this more than words illustration that's here, and hopefully somebody can put the more than words link in there. We have illustrations if you want to use them in your educational programming or to train people on your farm. Not all turbidity is caused from organic materials. And so you got to be really careful if you're using turbidity that you know what's causing that turbidity, because again, not all turbidity is organic or the same for that matter. Maintaining quality of water, treatment with sanitizers and other methods. So treating your water with a sanitizer is one way to maintain sanitary quality. It's not the only way, but it is one way. Looking at frequent water change schedules would be another way to make sure that you're addressing the sanitation of your water, or the sanitary quality, not the sanitation. If a treatment is used, it must be done in a controlled and scientifically valid way. If you're using a sanitizer, it has to be labeled. And you can see here in red, follow the instructions. That's really the label is the law. It has to be labeled for use with contact of either the food contact surfaces or the fresh produce, depending on how you're using that sanitizer. If you're using it to clean food contact surfaces, it has to be labeled for that. If you're using it in contact with the fresh produce, it has to expressly say it can be used for contact with fruits and vegetables. And you need to follow those instructions, including the level that's allowed, the contact time, all of those things. And again, so whether the treatment's effective can be supported with an EPA label or other reports showing that they're effective against human pathogens. This is one that is a real struggle right now because many chemicals are not labeled for use against human pathogens. And there's a lot of research going on. There was a question that was put into the pre-registration. Colleagues are doing research, giving that research to the chemical companies so that they can hopefully update their labels. We know a lot of chemical companies are not necessarily moving in that direction. We know some companies are, we know others are not, because it's not worth the effort or the expense to do that. So that is a topic that is very of concern and under discussion right now. A lot of work is being done again by colleagues such as Chana Rock out at the University of Arizona to try and address some of these concerns. It's just important that if you're going to pick a sanitizer, that you choose one that you can use properly, monitor properly, and make sure that it's working effectively. If you're not using it properly, it's not going to be effective, and it's not going to get you what you want in terms of food safety benefit, as well as any post-harvest benefit you might get from it. So that's really what I want to stress with this is if you're using a sanitizer, really understand how that sanitizer works, what parameters need to be met, whether it's a pH range or other factors that we talked about earlier, such as organic matter. Just make sure you are using it properly and know how to use it. To that end, we have created some tools to help you understand sanitizers. Two that I'm highlighting here, and there are others that we can share in the chat box, but one is our sanitizer tool. A lot of folks like this because it helps them identify which sanitizers are labeled for use in produce. Donna is working with Rob right now to convert this to an app to make it even more useful. But we also have this fact sheet here talking about how to select a sanitizer. 7, so this is the last one for our list of 7 things. And this is talking about infiltration of pathogens. So we know that if you have water that is contaminated and you give the right situation, right? So there's a big enough temperature differential, depth or time of submergence of the produce into the water, that you can get that water that's in that dump tank to go into the fresh produce. So you have, the PSR requires that you have to manage the risk of pathogen infiltration. The FDA has named a couple of these commodities. You can see here tomato, apple, orange, and mango as examples. We also know some industry guidance exists for tomatoes and papaya to reduce the likelihood of infiltration. What you're looking at here mostly is trying to keep the pulp temperature of the fruit, not so much different than the water, right? So if you have water that is cooler than the pulp temperature of the fruit, and you put it in there, you can get water to move into the fruit. Also that depth and submersion. So if you have a really deep dump tank and you pour a lot of product in there, the product that's farther down in that tank is more likely to see that infiltration. And if you think about when you dive into a pool and you can feel that pressure in your ears from sinking down into the water, it's the same kind of thing that's going on there. So again, you want that pulp temperature of the fruit to be cooler than the water, if you can make that happen, or move towards pre-cooling the fruit, or move towards a single pass water application. I know people use water to get rid of field heat, right? So if you can do that either by putting the produce in a cooler pre-cooling or a single pass water where you're not submerging that fruit is going to be the best way to prevent that infiltration. All right. So here's the key points for the harvest and post-harvest water. Make sure your water that you're using for harvest and post-harvest does not have any detectable generic E. coli at the start. Again, if you're using municipal water, you can use their test results. If you're using untreated groundwater, you need to test it. Most importantly, you cannot use untreated surface water. Okay, you cannot, even if your untreated surface water tests for no generic E. coli, which I have seen happen, even if you can test it, you cannot use untreated surface water in harvest and post-harvest activities. And remember, it always has to be safe and of adequate sanitary quality for its intended use. PSR requires you to have that change schedule and maintain that quality throughout. Sanitizers are not required, but they're a really good idea if you're using recirculated batch water, and I would even say in single pass water as well. All right. So moving on to production and post-harvest water, I'll stop here to see if there's anything in the chat that I need to address. Don, is there anything?
No, I think you're in good shape. Just
Okay.
just a couple of things I'm saving for the end.
Okay, great. Thanks. Production and post-harvest water, wanted to make it clear here that growing this agricultural water is not being enforced. And I did change this word thanks to some comments from my colleagues. This includes your MWQP sampling and your associated E. coli standards. New requirements are proposed, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation. We're hoping we might see them in October based on an FDA statement, but we don't know that for sure. FDA was just on a call and said they cannot say when the final release will come. Based on some comments from my colleagues, if inspectors are on the farm to look at your post-harvest water, they might ask questions about your production and pre-harvest water. It's not enforceable, but they may ask you questions. So it's just be aware of that they may ask you questions. This does not mean that you as a grower should not be paying attention to the water or know something about the quality until the rule is final, right? Food safety is important every day, whether it's a regulation or not. So the next slide is really where we talk about what do you do now? If you are testing your water now, continue to do so. If you're doing it to meet audit requirements, definitely continue to do it because you need to maintain your market. But I would say any grower using water, surface water, overhead irrigate, touching product, you really ought to be testing the water so you know what's going on. That is just the only way to know. There's no other way to look at that water and know what's going on without testing it. And again, you want to do quantified generic E. coli, especially if you're using a surface water source. Follow those good agricultural practices to protect and maintain that quality of water. What does that mean? Keeping animals out of the water, making sure the water is not subject to runoff if you have animals on the farm, making sure your distribution systems are clean, cleaning out those irrigation pipes before you hook them up at the beginning of the summer. Make sure the little mouse families that have taken up residence over the winter are cleaned out of there before you put your irrigation together. And really develop water management strategies such as those surveys to reduce the risks, right? Try and control the water as best you can on your property. I know a lot of us have rivers that run through our farms, but do what you can, where you can, work with your upstream neighbors to reduce those risks. Here you can see these are proposed FDA Subpart E compliance dates for pre-harvest or production water whenever we see it. It will become effective as proposed. We don't know this for sure until the rule is final, 9 months after the effective date for the largest farms, and then 1 year after that for all those other farms. Again, we have no dates. We don't even know if it's going to be 9 months, but this is what was in the proposed rule. So that's it for the talk. I do want to give you a few slides here. IFS at CU mailing list. We've been having some technical issues due to some not so nice people external to our operation. If you are not on our mailing list and you would like to be on our mailing list, please email foodsafety@cornell.edu with your first and last name and your email address, and we will add you manually. So you don't have to go to our website. You can just email us that and we will put you on there. Maybe, I don't know, somebody wants to put that in the chat box as I move along. Produce Safety Alliance and NECAFS has a look back survey where we're trying to gather information from, thank you, Donna, for putting it in the chat box. What we're trying to get from growers is, what are the costs and barriers of putting food safety practices on the farm? We want to develop educational materials that are relevant to what you're going through. It's available in English and Spanish. If you're a grower on this call, we invite you to take the survey. It won't take, I think, 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, and it would be great for us to help make things that are hopefully relevant and impactful to what you do. Here's the Produce Safety Alliance team. As you can see, they are located all over the country. If you are from New York, the folks that are going to be serving you are Donna Clements, who's on the call with me today, and our team that's based in Geneva, New York, Rob, Michelle, and Tori. If you're in the Southeast, Tommy Saunders can help you. Midwest, Lori George can help you. I also want to mention Yuli Menensis is in the, and Laura Acuna Maldonado also in the East, and they are Spanish language extension associates. When we move out west, we have Collins Bujingo, who is our Northwest Extension Associate. Thais Ramos would be happy to help you, but right now she's on maternity leave. And then, of course, Mariana Villarreal and Davis Blasini are our Spanish Language Extension Associates on the West Coast, and Don Steckel, who seems to be moving around a bit. But all of us are available to help if you have questions. If you want to reach out to your regional person, great. If you have somebody else you prefer, that's fantastic too, but let us know how we can help. Here's our website, available in English and Spanish. And we are also active on social media. And I know Tori has been working that as well. So with that, I am complete and we'll be happy to take questions or turn it over to Don for facilitation of the question and answer.
Thanks, Betsy, and thanks